Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the immune system and how that is all interconnected with fertility, how this is one of the big three factors that we've spoken about already, that can contribute, or at least help in some way go on to explain the unexplained. When you've been slapped with that diagnosis of unexplained infertility, we can use the immune system to actually dissect and put some understanding as to what's going on and why. So hopefully this will be informative for you, so you can better understand your own personal health, but also that unexplained aspect of your fertility diagnosis as well. So in today's Fertile Foundations webinar, we're going to be talking all about your immune system. So what is your immune system? What you need to look out for in regards to those big signs and symptoms that could indicate that there's an immune issue as well, and the role of the immune system as well when it comes to conception. There's a lot of controversy around reproductive immunology and within the fertility world. So I just want to discuss that briefly throughout as well, what that looks like and how we can navigate around that in order to be able to better get a better diagnosis and who to reach out to at that particular point as well. Okie dokes. So what is immunity and how does it impact fertility? So a woman's reproductive system and her immune system have this beautiful symbiotic relationship that science is still really getting to grips with. Your immune system guards against these foreign cells, these invaders, external invaders, such as, bacteria, viruses, and even the body's own cells if they become harmful, as is the case with autoimmunity and cancer, for example. You certainly know if you've got something like a cold. So you know that when your immune system is triggered in that way, and it goes on high alert, so you'll get all those signs and symptoms that you're really, really familiar with. Or for example, if you've got allergies, your immune system again will go on red alert. It will go become very sensitized in that respect. But if there's so much going on underneath the surface on a deep cellular level that actually we don't see, and that we don't get these big warning signs about, that can have this massive impact on our systemic health, so that whole body health and our hormones. And this is really where it comes into play with fertility specifically. So this is the tricky bit. Pregnancy in itself, it presents a biological conundrum. A woman's immune system must simultaneously not attack the developing embryo, which is at least half composed of foreign cells, obviously with it being half male, half female, whilst defending against infections and viruses that could disturb the embryo's development. The placenta is technically not the mother's tissue, it's the embryos, and for implantation in pregnancy to actually be successful, this foreign tissue must not be rejected. That's the key reason why early pregnancy can be a really, really tricky time as well. And I'm going to be going into this in a little more detail so you understand how important this immune system modulation is at each phase of the pregnancy. So it's definitely not about dialing things up and it's not about dialing things down. It's about having this very healthy balance to support not just implantation and the growth and development of that embryo, but also throughout pregnancy too. So for all your information, in case you don't know who I am and you're just tuning in for the first time, I'm Kimberly Shepherd, fertility support expert and acupuncturist and hormonal health detective. I have a passion for helping menstruating women explain the unexplained in their fertility journey, overcome the overwhelm, and navigate a misogynist healthcare. I've helped over hundreds and hundreds of women in my clinic to navigate this roller coaster to regain clarity and confidence in their fertile bodies, whilst going on to conceive naturally or through IVF, ART. So I just wanted to highlight here that there is there are these elements and components with your immune system that really feed into your overall general health, not just your fertile health. And these are statistics really from 2021, so not so long ago. When the immune system becomes so sensitized and activated, it can actually start attacking itself, which is what we call autoimmunity. With autoimmune conditions, we begin to destroy our own body's healthy cells and tissues because the immune system detects it as foreign. So these are the types of conditions that you might be familiar with as autoimmunity, things like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, lupus, thyroid disease, type 1 diabetes. Other things you might not be necessarily as familiar with, but are very, very specific for women's health, are things like endometriosis, PCOS, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, Crohn's, colitis, those types of IBD diagnoses as well. But we also have to look out for warning signs historically within our health history. And this is really where we come in as practitioners to help you dissect all of that to better understand exactly what's going on, where and why. Those warning signs are things like asthma and eczema, things like IBS, vitiligo, allergies, things as simple as hay fever, for example, PMDD, so that's that extreme mood fluctuations premenstrually, or even just severe PMS. Those are warning signs that would indicate to us that actually your immune system is reactive, albeit maybe not developed into that autoimmune state just yet, if at all, but that your immune system is highly triggered a lot of the time. So we also have to look out for certain symptoms as well. So maybe this would resonate with you, or maybe not. But symptoms of immune dysfunction could be things like fatigue, joint pain, swelling, skin problems, so that eczema, dermatitis, psoriasis type conditions, abdominal pain, digestive issues, things that have been kind of passed off as IBS, recurring fever, fluctuating in that respect, things like recurrent swollen glands, without any real explanation. And maybe these things are things that you've just normalized. And it's an interesting fact that women also are, whilst less susceptible to things like infectious disease in comparison to men, we're actually a lot more prone to autoimmune diseases. And whilst autoimmune diseases only, in theory, affect 8% of the population, it's actually 78% of that 8% that are women. And that's really, really significant. And that's why, again, we have to look into this in greater depth when we're actually addressing this unexplained fertility diagnosis. Because there's so much that we still don't know about the immune system, yet we do know how significant it is when it comes to fertility. So the reasons are not terribly well known, but you can see here in this slide that there are genetic predispositions, environmental factors, and immune regulation factors as well. So I want to discuss these in more detail because actually a lot of the time women say, oh, well, people say, should we say, that if we have a family history of thyroid problems, chronic fatigue, or endometriosis, or diabetes, for example, then we might lean into that. We might start saying that, oh, well, my mom has it, or, my grandma has it, for example. And so I'm likely to have it. And really, that's something that we've been conditioned to think. But I want to explore why that might not be the case and why we're not entirely at the mercy of our genes, albeit it is certainly a factor in regards to how these immune factors can come about. So we'll discuss that a little later. So how does this all relate to fertility? We need a healthy immune system for good egg quality, implantation, and to maintain a healthy pregnancy. So it's the big three in that respect. We need to make sure that egg quality is really good, to make sure we have that healthy baby, healthy pregnancy, and to make sure that that cellular division when it comes to fertilization is actually viable. Implantation is obviously, of course, really important for maintaining pregnancy, and to maintain a healthy pregnancy as well throughout. So making sure that placenta is not growing out of check, and is being fueled efficiently. We also know that things like if you have immune problems, they can become more heightened or in fact a little bit better during pregnancy, but that we have this predisposition to other things if we have immune factors as well, things like preeclampsia too, and gestational diabetes. So immune issues can impact our compatibility, immune reaction to the baby's sperm, immune reaction to the baby, sperm antibodies, and blood clotting problems, white blood cell overreactivity as well. So they're the immune things that can, or complications that can happen during that fertility process. There are specific immune cells in the uterus that ebb and flow throughout our cycle in anticipation of this pregnancy. And these are called NK cells. So you may have heard of them, you may not. But if you're a certain way down in your fertility journey and you're still not getting anywhere and you've done lots of reading, then you probably will have heard of this, this word NK cells being thrown around. These cells have a specific role in ramping up our immune response. And actually, this is really, really important around that implantation time. So this is vital for implantation to occur and maintain, as an embryo needs a certain level of inflammation to securely implant. And that sounds really unusual because we've spoken a little bit before in that first webinar about how destructive inflammation can be. But again, it's all about this balance. We need this ebb and flow and this symbiosis between the two, between a healthy immune system, between healthy inflammatory states at different times in our life cycle or menstrual cycle or fertility process, that can actually elicit a healthy response in the body. But what we don't want it to be is obviously too high or too low in any way, shape, or form. So some recent statistics show that embryo implantation remains the main limiting factor in assisted reproductive medicine, so IVF, ICSI, IUI, and that's at around about an average of 20% success rate. The endometrial immune profiles appeared to be dysregulated in 81.7% of those patients that suffered with recurrent implantation failure compared to a control, which is huge. That would indicate that there is this massive immune dysregulation amongst those women that have kind of been passed or dismissed as unexplained. And one of the biggest things that I really want to help women do and help couples is to not just cycle through the same thing and hope for a different result, but actually explore the mechanisms behind your physical self in your health, and start to piece together a really effective diagnosis and treatment plan so you can approach the next steps in your fertility journey, be it natural conception or IVF, ICSI, or whatever, with confidence that you're doing something differently, that you're approaching it differently, and that you would hope and then therefore expect a different outcome. So when dysregulated, it also affects things like blood clotting, and it can shut down those small blood vessels. So that in itself starts to cause and elicit a lack of nutrients and oxygen locally. But it's not just about the endometrium, as I mentioned. The environment has to be hormonally, metabolically, and immunologically sound. And if it's not, the quality of the egg is massively impacted. So as I said, implantation is just a small part of it. our immune system can actually impact how the quality of the egg grows as well. And that's all down to inflammation. So there's this definite harmony between, dance between inflammation and your immune system. There's also a relationship between your immune system and miscarriage. And what they found is that there's this systemic autoimmunity and how it's associated with the increased prevalence of recurrent miscarriage and reproductive failure, rendering the role of maternal immunological systems in fertility a key concept that needs further exploration and further studies as well. Although it is definitely growing, and there are many more specialists in reproductive immunology around and about. Women who are at high risk, just for your information as well, just a little more about miscarriage. So women at high risk of miscarriage already have a greater susceptibility for stress built in their physical constitution before they even suffer a loss. And I don't mean stress as an external, I mean stress as an internal. So all those areas of hidden inflammation that we spoke about in that first seminar, all of this feeds into the systemic stress response in the body. So we already know that those areas of hidden inflammation are having this massive pendulum effect on our immune system. So we need, in order to modulate our immune system and get our body fertile friendly, what we need to do is dial down those inflammatory mechanisms. Miscarriage risks as well. If you've already had a miscarriage before, you're statistically more likely to have another one. 16.6% risk, there's a 16.6% risk of having a miscarriage generally, but if you've had 2 or more miscarriages, the risk goes up to 37.5%. So this again would indicate that there's a persisting immune risk factor there that's feeding into this recurrent miscarriage picture. I want to highlight as well that just if you are approaching this fertility journey from a secondary fertility perspective, so if it's your second or third child, it's not to say that things will be easy this time. A lot of women come in and they say, but I got pregnant really quickly the first time. It's definitely not to say that that's the case this time, the second time or third time. Because in secondary infertility, that second time round, your immune system could have been triggered simply by being pregnant in that first instance. So if you have that history or genetic predisposition for immune factors, pregnancy can again trigger that immune response and make it a little more difficult for you to conceive the second or third time round. So I want to talk about balance. Our healthy immune system isn't just, it's not just about not getting sick. So again, people come in and they say, oh, I never get sick, and it's something to be celebrated. In actual fact, getting sick and having a healthy immune response is a very healthy sign of a healthy immune system. And what really we're looking at is how you recover from that. Do you recover quickly and bounce back without any of these lingering post-viral, post-bacterial symptoms going on? Or do you linger in that state of illness for a while, which would indicate that your immune system isn't quite hitting the mark in regards to kicking all of that out? So it's definitely not about not getting sick. It's about having a healthy immune response. We need, and in the same instance, when we talked about those NK cells before, they're called natural killer cells. We actually need those cells in the body for defense against foreign invaders, sorry, I'm tongue-tied today, foreign invaders and the growth of cancer cells. Without enough immune activity in pregnancy, then the placenta would just continue to grow and grow and grow. So the immune system itself inhibits its growth and function when in balance. That's obviously a very good thing. Otherwise, it would just completely take over. So again, we need that modulation between the two. So not overactive, but not underactive to be able to maintain that healthy pregnancy. We definitely need balance in that respect. So in in Western medicine, in reproductive immunology, with your specialist fertility consultants, you may have heard them bounce around this idea of your immune system and having two aspects to it. So again, the overactive and the underactive, and this is called Th1 and Th2. So there's two aspects of your immune system. Th1, if it's dominant, there would be too much of an immune response. And that's your autoimmune type conditions. And if it's Th2 dominant, then there'll be no immune response at all. And that's when we typically start seeing these kind of allergy symptoms that are just niggling and underlying. And things like chronic fatigue as well. So Th2 dominant, you become much more Th2 dominant in pregnancy. So your immune system is dialed down, which is why sometimes those autoimmune symptoms get a little bit better during pregnancy. And Th1 is most dominant postpartum, which is why sometimes if you have an autoimmune condition, it can feel heightened after you've given birth. This is why those things really need to be checked by your specialist consultant throughout and afterwards as well, just to make sure that you're A-okay. So what does it look like? How do we know if you have an immune dysfunction or immune dysregulation? Obviously, we can, as practitioners, we look to see if we can pick up on those red flags or signs and symptoms that might indicate that you would need further testing. But there are specialists around that do very specialist testing. And so I'll just dive into that briefly for you now, so that you've got an idea and an understanding around what it is that you actually need to do should you have these types of conditions, and you're trying to conceive and you've been diagnosed with unexplained infertility. So with reproductive immunology, this is the theory that a fetus is rejected by the body due to immune cells in the body. It's thought that natural killer cells, those NK cells, which we spoke about before, which help to keep the body from developing things like cancer, they can overpopulate in the uterus or exist at excessive levels within the bloodstream. These cells then go overboard, attacking the embryo or interfering with the endocrine system, so our hormones, that produce the hormones that are essential for pregnancy. This is currently, there's currently a lot of debate around this in the fertility world, but it's definite, there's a growing breadth of evidence that would point in this direction to help us explain all of those unexplained cases in there too. So it's worthwhile speaking to your consultant about exploring in greater depth. So there's an amazing, there was an amazing doctor who's kind of started the ball rolling with this in America, and he was one of the primary instigators of this, of highlighting how significant the immune system is with fertility. His name was Dr. Alan Beer in Chicago. He is widely accredited for a pioneer, as a pioneer in the field of reproductive immunology. He believed it was not simply due to bad luck that some women failed to conceive or have repeated miscarriages. For an in-depth look at reproductive immunology, and he wrote a book, and it's called Is My Body Baby Friendly? And I highly, highly recommend reading it if you do want to explore this in more detail prior to you looking into these things. So he developed this test called the Chicago test. And what he does there is he looks at how your, if there is an immune problem, so he'd look at things like your Th1 and Th2 immune profile. He'd look at those inflammatory markers in there as well. So these cytokines and TNF alpha. And what he would do is use a little pregnancy tissue and put it in the in with some immune modulating drugs to see how it reacted ultimately. And if it reacted well, then we would know that that was a treatment that would be beneficial to you in regards to moving forwards. with immune modulating drugs for in preparation for trying to conceive. So there's that was his pioneering test, sorry, and it's led to amazing studies and research, but further tests as well that are much more readily available to us here in the UK, and that's called the St. Helier 3-beaker test, and of course was developed in St. Helier down in Epsom. That's another amazing test that looks at 3 different types of immune modulating drugs and its response to pregnancy tissue to make sure, again, that you're getting the most relevant drug for you in dialing down that immune system prior to you going on to conceive. So that's it in an absolute nutshell. There's so much more to it, but definitely reach out to your doctor to explore this in more detail if you've got a family health history of autoimmune conditions, or you have an autoimmune condition yourself, or you've been diagnosed with unexplained infertility and you want to explore this in more detail. Or you can reach out to us and we'll give you some more information. So one thing I just want to highlight here, and whilst I know I mentioned before that genetics make it so that there's a predisposition to you developing immune dysfunction issues as well. So again, if your mum has it, then maybe you've got this genetic predisposition to developing something similar. But what I want to highlight is that you're not at the mercy of your genes. So there's this concept called epigenetics, and I want you to explore this in more detail. I'm going to send you a link. I'm not going to play it today, although it's really, really interesting and it's not that long, but I'm going to send you the link to it anyway. It's by Dr. Bruce Lipton. Sorry, there's a couple of typos on my slides. And he says if genes control you, then you're a victim of your hereditary. And the principle around epigenetics is actually that this is entirely false. We're not at the mercy of our genes. And in actual fact, if we just look to improve our external environment, then we can actually dial down that immune response and dial down those genetic triggers that can lead us towards that predisposition. So he outlines a new understanding of life based on his pioneering research with stem cells at Stanford University. In his book, Dr. Lipton proclaims that genes do not control your biology and that cellular perceptions of the environment are the primary factors in biological processes. We spoke about this briefly before in that first webinar, how that internal environment is so fundamental to your overall general health, dialing down those hidden areas of inflammation. But also now we can see in this respect how much of that external environment plays into how our immune system functions as well, which is absolutely vital when it comes to trying to conceive. So today, medical students and practitioners are still operating under the assumption that genes, the blueprints that proteins are made from, are the primary factor in biological processes. But epigenetics is a belief that you can alter your genetics by modifying your behavior, not your environment, not by taking medications, and not by being a victim of your hereditary. It's the environment, not your genes, that determines how well you can function. So this is a massive concept, and one that I encourage you to explore in more detail, because it does require a complete shift in paradigm around how we've come to think about ourselves and our physical health. But I encourage you to explore that. I'm going to be sending you through a TEDx link as well that explores epigenetics, again, in brief, but more detail. For your information too. So it's all really, really interesting stuff. And if you're like me, the more information, the better, because it creates this understanding in yourself that you have full control over your health and your body. And taking back control during that fertility journey is so fundamental. It gives us a sense of confidence back in ourself in those next steps as well. So I highly recommend you and encourage you to read a little bit more about that as well. So I want to go into a little bit about what I'm going to be doing. So all of these webinars have been feeding into this this concept that I've created, this partnership to pregnancy that I've created, where I help women that have been diagnosed with unexplained infertility better understand exactly what's going on in their body through a 4-step approach. So we look at that external environment, how we can dial down that immune system if it's overreactive, how we can work with our body and not feel like it's constantly against us, and how we can improve that fertile soil so that we have the capacity to thrive and actually work with that fertile potential as well. So I'll email you a few more details about that too, if you are interested. This is a slide from the first webinar, but it just extends from what we spoke about, what Bruce Lipton spoke about as well, that our soil, our environment, our terrain is everything, and how actually if we work with that, and we work with changing our environment and dialing down those things that we know to be triggers for our immune system, for inflammation, we can drastically change our health as well. So I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here, as I did go into it in great depth in the first webinar. But this is just an idea and a reflection of how we can support ourselves and how we're not entirely at the mercy of everything else, our genetics as well. So I wanted to just end on this idea. So looking at the top contributors to immune factors that can impact that internal environment, that impact that inner soil, and that can have those immune modulating effects. So there's lots of research and lots of evidence around these things to various degrees. So again, I encourage you to go out there and read them. They are very generic and they aren't going to apply to all of you. And you might often say that but I'm doing everything right. So why is it that, Sheila down the road, let's say, is getting pregnant but she's drinking 3 bottles of wine a night? I don't know, I'm exaggerating, but you get the gist. That's when we have to start looking at this immune system. And for you, there might be one specific trigger that is just sending this immune system into a spiral, and that's causing this immune cascade and contributing towards affecting things like egg quality, endometrial receptivity, and pregnancy, maintaining a healthy pregnancy as well. So it could just be one small thing. And what we have to do is better understand what that small thing is for you specifically. So in Chinese medicine, it's called mianyi, which means that the immune system is called mianyi, which means the avoidance of epidemic disease. And this feeds in beautifully to what we've just spoken about. Actually, it's not about the disease itself. It's about the avoidance of the disease. So making sure that that internal environment is healthy so that actually we're not triggered, our immune system and our genetics aren't triggered by those external pathogens or those internal mechanisms that are currently spiraling our immune system out of control and contributing to things like autoimmunity. Most of the time we've gone past this point, and what we can't do is turn off the immune system that's already been triggered. So we can't go from having thyroid antibodies to not. But what we can do is work on modulating, so dialing down the volume on those immune responses, And there's a number of ways that we can do that to make that feel so much more comfortable symptomatically, but also you feel a lot more confident in your body from a fertile potential perspective. So that's where I'm going to end it today. There was lots of information. It's such a complex area of health. And it's also a budding area of research in regards to fertility medicine. So it's still in its infancy in that respect, but it's gaining so much pace very, very quickly, because there has to be reasons and there has to be mechanisms behind these unexplained diagnoses that we're seeing. And as I mentioned in my previous webinars, looking at those areas of hidden inflammation, now we can see how that can impact your immune system as well, and how the two are so they go so much hand in hand, because where one is exuberant, then it's going to cause it's going to exacerbate the other. So it's just this vicious circle in that respect. And what we have to do is just manage that where we can and modulate it where we can. And then, of course, when we're looking at the other factor of unexplained being male factor, because it's something that is just never or very, very rarely explored to the degree and depth that it needs to be able to better understand the specifics of what's going on with those unexplained diagnoses. So I encourage you to watch all of those.